is what we're going to be talking about today. This is the birth of Messiah, part 1 of 2. We're specifically in Matthew. I think what we're going to do is next year we're going to focus on Luke around this time of year. So we'll do the infancy narrative of Luke next year. It'll be the Lucan year. So that's fine. Let's do that. Last time we shared that there are good reasons not to try to harmonize what we read in the infancy narrative of the gospel called Matthew chapter 1 and 2, with the infancy narrative of the gospel called Luke chapter 1 and 2. We saw that these accounts were written to establish Jesus' honor despite his lowly origins. We saw that while these accounts are true, and even in some ways historically true, they are not completely historical. There is so very much we assume when we read the Gospels, we meaning Americans, the Western people. We tend to assume that the Gospels are low context literature, meaning all the pertinent information has been provided. So everything that we need to know has been explained in full detail. The Gospels are actually high context documents, ladies and gentlemen. They leave much to the imagination of the reader, and the author, the sacred author of the particular text of the Bible we're reading, whoever it is, in this case Matthew, assumes that you belong to his culture, sharing his cultural background and his auxiliary background information, so that he doesn't need to spell out in fine detail what he means and what he alludes to when he speaks, when he writes. So when he mentions things, he, being part of a high context culture, expects you to share his high context and all that auxiliary background information. Follow? Whenever you get low context readers, our culture here in the West is low context. Whenever you get low context readers reading high context literature like the Bible, misunderstanding and distortion of the text necessarily results. Consider for a moment what you imagine the Holy Family to look like. Being Middle Eastern, it is nothing at all like the families we Western people know. So if you bring your American ideas of family into the Bible, into the Gospel of Matthew, when you're reading the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Luke, and every time you read about family or the Holy Family in the Bible, you picture in your head Mom, Dad, Dick, Jane, Spot, and Fluffy, you're simply getting it dead wrong. There's no family like that to be found anywhere in the Bible, and the Holy Family doesn't match up to that either. What you're doing is you're bringing in an alien scenario, an incorrect image into your reading, and you're necessarily distorting the text. The human authors of Scripture, Matthew and Luke included, never thought that they would have to explain to their audience what family, as they understood family, is. They never felt the need to explain how family works. They never have felt the need to explain what all family relationships entail. So this illustrates for us that the Bible is a high context document, and it requires that the reader be a respectful reader to the author and keep aware of what is the appropriate cultural scenario as he or she reads. Does everybody understand that? Are we all on the same page there? Yeah? Okay. So what we're going to be doing today and next week is going through the gospel called Matthew And it's Christmas story, Matthew chapter 1 and chapter 2. But we're going to be doing it with new scenarios in our minds, not American Western scenarios or scenarios shaped by the 2,000 years of devotional and emotional freight that we have that gets just popping out with our dopamine receptors going off at this time of year when we got Christmassy feelings in our heads. We're going to shake off some of that spurious familiarity and go back with new scenarios in our minds when we read Matthew chapter 1 and 2, those that are culturally plausible to the sacred author and his audience. That's what means being a respectful reader of the Bible. A respectful audience tries to listen to what the author is telling him or her. Just like a respectful author attempts to know his or her audience and give the message that can be palatable and receivable by his or her audience. So you got a problem right there, because Matthew is a high context Mediterranean author, Israelite author 2,000 years ago. Okay, high context. We are a low context American Western audience. And again, whenever you get a high context literature being read by low context readers, misunderstanding necessarily results, distortion necessarily results. In order to get the right scenarios in our heads so that the author, Matthew, can properly manipulate them, because what every author wants to do, every person who ever writes anything, is get into the reader's mind and manipulate their furniture, their conceptual furniture, so that there can be a simpatico, there can be an understanding, there can be a touching base, a connection, a marriage between author and reader. You follow? In order to get that, we don't have to go, oh my God, Bill, what do you expect us to do? Do we have to study the Middle East? No, we don't have to study the Middle East. This is Bible Alive, not Middle East Alive. But what we do want to do is understand how the culture, which hasn't changed significantly in 4,000 years, the culture of the Middle East works. And plug that working into our Christmas stories. Is that cool?
Yes.
If prior to his death, the pre-Paschal Jesus could somehow have been picked up by a time machine and thrown into the modern Middle Eastern village of today, in any Middle Eastern village of today, and interacted with the people there, he would feel quite at home. I mean, the new inventions in technology like motorcycles and electricity and cell phones, they would be mind-boggling to him. They would shock him, but everything else would make sense to him. The way people talk, the way people behave, everything that the people do, how they eat, how the men and women interact, except that of the modern inventions involving, weird technologies, everything else would be right at home for him, familiar with him.